All right. Let's get going. If you guys were in my my other talk on Monday, you guys know, you'll know the drill. All right. I'm going to take a selfie. I want everyone to get into it. All right. Everybody ready?
I don't know.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm Bryce. I'm an inclusive designer from Microsoft. I work on accessibility for Windows and our hardware. I'll probably be talking mostly about hardware today, but I'm going to give you a glimpse into how we run our inclusive design sprints. And our inclusive design sprints are typically 1 or 2 days. You've got a schedule in the handout of kind of how we do it. We start by basically giving an inclusive design 101. That's mostly what I'll be giving you today, but I'll be stopping along the way to kind of give you some tips about how to run these yourself. I also, today I will be talking about AI. I didn't talk about AI on Monday, but today I will be. My retirement depends on Copilot, so, it's kind of just how it is. But I'm going to show you how we are using AI to extend our research and extend our work, but not to supplant our work with the disabled, because the core principle of our inclusive design methodology is that you cannot do inclusive design without the people you are designing for. Nothing about us without us. We strive to design with our customers and not for our customers, okay? That's the goal. This is, again, is the Inclusive Tech Lab. In the handout, there's a link to the site where you can basically sign up for a tour. We would love to give you and your teams a tour. We do them remotely. You do not have to come to Seattle, although we would love to have you. But yeah, let's get going. Oh, I didn't turn my mouse on. So this is kind of the high-level overview of what we're going to be going through today. We did the intro. We're going to talk about charrettes. Has anyone ever heard of charrette before? I feel like an old codger talking about charrettes. The origins of charrettes. Architectural students rushed to finish drawings before they were collected. They became a symbol of intense, last-minute creative work. Right? In the mid-20th century, charrettes were adopted by urban planners in the US, used to gather community input for fast-paced design sessions. They became a collaborative tool for public problem solving. And then our modern practice, as we formalize our design sprints, they're very common in inclusive design and urban design because we focus on co-creation. So just to give you a little bit of a history. There's been some disability statistics and things thrown around over the past couple days. This is the World Health Organization site. Oops. The World Health Organization redefined its definition of disability in 2014 from a personal health condition to a mismatch in interactions between a person and their environment. So what does that mean? It means that if a person in a wheelchair rolls into a building and they need to get to the second floor, it's not their fault. It's not the wheelchair's fault. If there's no elevator, if there's only a staircase, it's the architect's fault, right? So it puts the onus on us as the creation of product designers. If I am feeling salty and I will say that modern industrial design and mass manufacturing were the creation of systemic ableism. Get a few drinks in me and I'll go on about it. But not to be too heavy-handed. But yeah, the World Health Organization estimates there's 1.3 billion people in the world with a disability. And that's really cool. It's a really important number. It's also, what the heck do you do with that, right? That's a lot of people. I'm going to show you some other data just to kind of give you a little bit of context into how these kind of things can break down. This is disability data by age in the 2019 US Census. Okay. So from ages 5 to 20, you can see that overall from ages 5 to 20, there's not a lot of people who are disabled, right? And the prominent disability when you're in ages 5 to 20 is cognitive. As you move from ages 21 to 64, AKA working years, at least in the US, right? You start to see a little bit more distribution, right? People start to acquire disabilities as they age. And then as you get to 65, you see that ambulatory, hearing, and visual are huge, and cognitive is, not as big anymore. It's just kind of how things roll out. So before coming here, I was in India, so I'm sorry. I couldn't find Austrian data, but I have this Indian data, which is actually interesting kind of to contrast. This is the best report I could find out of India about prevalence. That 1.3 billion people with disabilities in the world works out to about 12% of the population-ish, right? India says that only 4.5% of their population is disabled. So I think that's underreporting, but let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Still a good study. You can see how they break down by disability types. So it is pretty interesting. Oh, actually, I'm going to go back. One thing, though, I want to remind people of when it comes to India, 4.5% of India is more people than the bottom 100 countries in the world. That's a lot, So it's kind of important to kind of recognize that. But let's look at how this could kind of, maybe some reasoning why India has lower disability numbers than maybe other countries. These are population pyramids for India, US, and Japan, right? India has a relatively low they have a regular population pyramid. It looks as it should, right? The US is a bit more of a column, and Japan starts to get a little bit lopsided, right? They have a very aging population. So it's always interesting to think about this, the connection with age and disability. Going to go back to some US numbers for a second. These are, I'm standing in front of them, standing in front of your charts. And by the way, just so folks know, in that handout, I've got a link to all these slides. So you can totally take pictures, but you can also grab them. On the left there, I take the 11% of the 18 to 65-year-old US population, according to Department of Labor statistics and you can see the distribution of disabilities. Now, if you're wondering what independent living and self-care is, just kind of ignore them for now. It's basically like, can you live on your own? Can you put on your own clothes? They're a little bit hard to kind of wrap your head around. But you can see that cognitive is still the #1 disability between 18 and 65-year-olds. Again, as someone who works at Microsoft, I'm very interested in working age people, right? So this is really important for me. Hearing, vision, ambulatory is up there. And here on the right, there's this thing that you'll often hear when they talk about disabled employment, that at least in the US, again, I keep prefacing that. Sorry, I don't have better data. But in the US, they say that the disabled are half as employed as the non-disabled. The employment to population ratio is 2 to 1, right? And that is this white line right there, okay? And it's from 2010 to 2022. That's the range of data I have. But you can see that people with limited vision, limited hearing are above that average line, whereas people with limited cognition and ambulatory are below it, which makes sense. What's really interesting is to see this cognitive hockey stick right there. So basically, from the beginning of the pandemic to the end of the pandemic, you had a huge sort of jump. Does anyone remember the term like quiet quitting and stuff like that? So remote work was huge for the disabled. They could get jobs that they never had before. But I also think that part of this was that a lot of people quit jobs that they felt weren't really worth it for them, and disabled folks snapped them up. So great. But it's interesting for us to kind of look at. It's interesting for us to think about as we create products. Anyone in here make like some, especially like things like enterprise products, those are cool. So that's the data part. I just wanted to give you some context because a lot of times you'll see people like me come up and just tell you the World Health Organization number, and you're like, that's cool, but what the heck do I do with that? Like, can anyone imagine what it's like to design for 1 billion people? There you go. Yeah. I mean, Renee can. So, see, now I get to call you out. This is fun. Yeah, LinkedIn has over 1 billion users. Windows has over 1 billion users. It's mind-numbing. So these are the principles of our inclusive design methodology. I'm going to go through them all for you, but not recognize exclusion, learn from diversity, solve for one, extend to many. This is the foundation of our practice, how we sort of approach it. So let's start with the first one, recognize exclusion. Exclusion happens when we solve problems using our own biases. As Microsoft designers, we seek out those exclusions and use them as opportunities to create new ideas and inclusive designs. Sometimes people think this is the easy one because it's the first one. I will tell you it is not, because I am telling you that your life experiences are wrong. And your experience is a bias, and I need you to confront it, and that can be uncomfortable. So, but that's what we do. Tons of students come up to me. They want to talk about inclusive design. I go, hey, they go, how do I get into inclusive design? I go, how many disabled people you know? And they go, none. And I go, well, I see the problem, right? Again, we don't think about it. So I mentioned this in my other talk, but I'm going to go through it again. For us, this is a good example of what we needed to recognize, the exclusion that in the controllers that we designed. Again, the Xbox controller, the greatest game controller you can get. But if you look at this through the lens of exclusion, we had to recognize that we designed them in a way that unintentionally excluded people. So we assume that the user has 2 hands to hold it, right? And that they have thumb movement to hit those sticks. We assume that people have fine motor control to hit all those buttons. And sometimes game designers assume that people can hit multiple buttons at the same time. We assume that people have the reach with their index fingers to get to those bumpers and triggers. And then we assume that people have the grip and the strength and the endurance to be able to hold this thing, right? Because if you've ever tried to put a controller on a flat surface, it doesn't work very well, right? So basically, if you couldn't do this, you couldn't play Xbox, right? We were gating the console. I will say, though, that, as in any project, you learn about things kind of after you've kind of gone through it. This article came out in 2020. This was a couple of years after the adaptive controller was launched. It was about how video games are saving those who served. If anyone knows anything about the adaptive controller, they might have seen our Super Bowl ad, which had a bunch of little kids basically running around and playing video games. It's very cool. It's a lovely thing. But we created the adaptive controller by working with vets, right? And I will tell you that I am very, very confident that if we didn't work with vets, we would have never made it. Because the thing about vets, there's a bunch of things about vets. They've all grown up playing video games by now, right? And when they're deployed, it's a large part of their social life. And it's very hard for a veteran to come back from service and reintegrate back into society. And if they can't play video games with their squad, it is soul crushing. We've had people tell us, I couldn't play video games. All I did was sit around and drink. Right? But even in this study, they talk about how suicide rates for vets are higher than the civilian population, right? 1.5% higher, or times higher. This is a quote by one of the charities that we worked with when we developed the adaptive controller, a guy named Ken Jones. He said, once those disabled veterans were able to get back into gaming, they'd come back with positive attitudes towards therapy. Playing video games was a major plus for them. So many people are alive today because of these technologies. Many would have committed suicide. So, heavy stuff, right? But that's kind of why we had to do it. We heard these stories, right? And we had veterans on the team, and that connection was made. So we created the Xbox adaptive controller for gamers with limited mobility, but we were inspired to support the mental health of the veterans we partnered with. And as you dive into inclusive design and you go into this, you will see this pattern come up again and again. The barrier might be a physical or cognitive barrier to doing something, but the toll is on mental health often, right? So be aware of this and figure out how you can connect these things together. Interrelated need is super important. So let's do a demo. All right, hope this works. So I've started to basically use AI to help generate these ideas, right? When you meet people with disabilities, that's the primary way you get them. But you kind of need to figure out who you might want to go after. So what I've done is I've created this prompt. And the reason why I haven't made an agent or something out of it yet is that it's still really new. And I'm terrified of basically creating a disability recognized exclusion agent that goes like crazy, right? So I'm going to work it out. I'm going to take it slow. But the way that this prompt works is it basically says, ask to describe a website in detail, clarify questions. The secret is that these reference files that I am including are quite extensive. You could probably just read them to figure some things out too. And then I'm going to ask you to think deeply about it. So let's try it out. Let's do a live demo here. So I copied that pattern. I'm going to paste it here into Copilot. Again, that's my retirement. Zoom in here. So, could you describe your website in detail by providing the following 3 items? Is it an e-commerce site? What are the key interactive features, and what are typical user tasks? Who would like to try this out? Anyone got a website that they work on that they could basically tell me, kind of answer these questions for? That's okay. I'll put one in. Let's say I've got an e-commerce. Can't spell today. E-commerce. Fun thing about AI is that you don't really have to do a shopping cart. You don't have to give it a ton of information. Typical user task, buy stuff. There we go. So it's going to go away and think. Oh, no, it's going to ask me more clarifying questions. What type of products are going to be sold? Let's say hair care. Why not? How is the site structured visually? Infinite scroll. And my intended audience, women. Let's do that. There you go. So it goes away, and I've told it to return like 30 examples. So this is really just to get your, this is just a tool to kind of help you figure this out. Again, the links to this are in the handout. The prompts are all online. This is all just on GitHub. You can take it all. I've purposely kind of set it up this way. Nothing is hidden from you. If you want to go look at the source files, they're right in the prompt, right? I will continue to kind of blow these out, but I always like my AI to give me lots of stuff. I know people don't, but like tiny tap targets, selecting filters or products on mobile, operability. That operability part, if you've done any of the WCAG stuff in here, you've heard about perceivability, operability, understandability, robustness, poor. I do like them, so I put them in here to just kind of give you a little bit more cohesion around the data. But yeah, that's something that you can kind of play with. All right. So far, so good? Cool. Learn from diversity. Human beings are the real experts in adapting to diversity. Inclusive design puts people in the center from the very start of the process, and those fresh, diverse perspectives are the key to true insight. This is us. This is us telling ourselves to make sure that we practice nothing about us without us. It's a slogan of the disability community, right? No one in here would like to have something, say, from a government, does a government program design something and imposes something on you and you're not even part of the conversation, right? That's where this kind of came from. It actually came from, or one of the origins of it, it came from when closed captioning was being put into law on production TV and they didn't talk to any deaf people. So, yeah. So, learn from diversity. When we created the adaptive controller, we had to basically go out into the world and we had to meet with all kinds of people with different disabilities. There are some folks from very early on in the process. The guy in the red shirt in the top corner, he was the very first guy we ever talked to. We have a bit of our Super Bowl ad and some other folks here. But I think the one thing that I can tell you about all these folks from a kind of fundamentals point of view, if you think about what I talked about the controller, it assumes you have grip and fine motor control. And these folks, people who are limb different, people who have spinal cord injuries, people who are cerebral palsy, don't have fine motor control. They have gross motor control, right? So we needed to create a modular controller for them so that we could put the control where they have movement, right? The reason why we call the adaptive controller is because it adapts to you and not you to it, right? Way too often in society, we ask disabled people to put in the extra work and adapt to things that everyone else does. And what we are trying to do in our practice is make things that fit them. You know, we talked about one size fits one in my presentation on Monday, and that's really what we're trying to strive for, is this idea of fit, right? So when we were creating the adaptive controller, we worked with all 5 of these charities from the very, very, very beginning of the project. Like before we even had a green light about whether or not we were going to do it, we had all these folks involved. We started with Warfighter Engaged. They were a charity that was specifically focused on veterans, but they were a charity of 2 or 3 people. We went with Able Gamers, which is the largest gaming accessibility charity in the US. We talked to the Cerebral Palsy Foundation, not really gaming related, but very important. We talked to Special Effect, which is the largest gaming accessibility charity in the UK. And then we talked to Craig Hospital, which is a spinal cord and brain injury hospital out of Denver, Colorado. These are some photos from Special Effects Instagram that I used to have on my wall like 12 years ago, right? You know, these were the rigs that they would make for people that would inspire us to kind of build what we did. Now, what's interesting about all these charities is they all have a similar goal. They're trying to get people with disabilities to play video games, but they all have very different operational models. And we needed to kind of look at that. And we also needed to kind of think beyond it. So Able Gamers, because they're in the US, they basically will take a grant application, they'll fill it out, they'll throw stuff in a box and they'll mail it to you. And then, you know, you can talk to them and kind of, they'll coach you through it remotely. Cerebral Palsy Foundation didn't do any gaming stuff in particular. We talked to them mostly about the societal belonging. Special Effect, because you're in the UK, they'll take a technician and an occupational therapist. They'll put them in a car and they'll drive to your house across the UK, right? They'll set something up in your living room. You don't get to keep the stuff. It's more of a lending library because people with disabilities needs change over time. And so when your needs change, they'll bring you new stuff and they'll just take their old stuff back, right? Craig Hospital, US hospitals are a thing. You know? Now, that just means that they're very formal, you know, litigation, yuck. You know, so they were very professional, but they were really ingenious. They had a 3D printing lab really early on. They would basically set these games up for folks. And then Warfighter, because Warfighter was so closely tied to Walter Reed, which is the Veteran Affairs Hospital, they were heavily into prosthetics. So the thing about Warfighter setups is that they were basically little mini cockpits for these guys. Like they were just tuned to them, like, and very extensive and wild. So you have Able Gamers who are like going to throw some stuff in a box and ship it to you and go, hey, let's figure this out. You got Special Effect who are going to drive to your house and they'll actually help you figure it out. And then you've got Warfighter who's going to basically build you a private cockpit, you know, that you can kind of immerse yourself in. So we had to support all of these folks. They all have similar goals, but they have different operational models. And we needed to design a product that worked for those operational models, right? So And that's how we thought about it. And the other side of it too, what we're talking to these charities all the time, and we're thinking, oh, well, we'll increase their output. But if you increase the output of these charities, it's a tiny number. So we had to think beyond that too. We had to think about, so because most of these charities were very technical and had to do very technical things to kind of do it, some of the conflicts that we had with them was they wanted us to basically just like give them raw developer access to like the console. And we're like, no, we need to make a product that can go in a store that someone could go buy, take home and set up and do it by themselves. You know, I know you're really technical and you want to solder things, but our customers don't, right? So that's the kind of the balance that we worked on with all these folks. This is a rig from Craig Hospital. So this guy's got his monitor would be on the ceiling. He's playing video games, lying in bed. Spinal cord injury. This person is in the Inclusive Tech Lab. They have cerebral palsy. They're playing Forza with their feet. They don't have hand use, right? So again, modularity. These are some spinal cord injury folks and other folks with CP. You can see they're moving the buttons around. There is a renowned disability advocate named Todd Stabelfeld, who has a spinal cord injury. And he says that the difference between accessibility and inaccessibility for him, because he doesn't have any hand movement, he does everything with his mouth, basically, is mere millimeters, right? So if you look at these setups and go, man, that's a big old mess of wires. It is. I will admit it. But I also know that day by day, moving that button a millimeter one day can actually make a difference. And a fun story, you know, therapists like us, and I work with a lot of therapists, therapists like to move buttons further away so that people can get exercise and do that. And they're like, and then when the therapists aren't looking, I move the button back because I'm not into better people. I am into higher scores. Okay. When you eat the mushroom in Super Mario, you become Super Mario. That's what we want. We want you to become Super Mario. So I have this constant sort of push and pull with all types of professions, right? If I'm in rehabilitation, they want me to make better people and I want to make more productive people. And that's a difference. If I'm in education, they want better pedagogy and I want better autonomy, right? I don't need to learn Spanish to order from the taco truck, right? So that's how we sort of think about it. Okay, hopefully I'm going to play this video. This is one of our videos. We have this great series of videos that we use to give people an idea, a glimpse into people's lives. This is of Victor, who is, again, a world-renowned kind of disability activist.
Titles: Inclusive, a Microsoft Design Toolkit. Victor Pineda, urban planner, filmmaker. A quote: I am a speaker, scholar, and storyteller. A young woman takes Victor's hand.
There was this really beautiful older student, and I wasn't quite sure how I would dance with her, but she was such a good dancer that as soon as we started to move my chair, and she started to dance with me, and the dance floor opened up, and I realized everybody was looking at us, and we were the center of attention because we were just having such a good time. And so I've always loved music, but I realized that I could express that music through the way I moved my body.
His wheelchair rolls on the dance floor.
You don't just need 2 feet to dance. You need to have rhythm and soul, and I've got plenty of both.
Lying on a bed, Victor holds a keyboard and gazes at the ceiling monitor.
I stopped walking when I was about 5 years old. I had gradual weakness in my muscles, and by the time I was in high school, I used a machine to help me breathe.
A breathing tube fits over his nose.
You know, I was watching the movie Matrix. Do you take the red pill or the blue pill? And the question is, would I take a pill that would make my disability go away? And that's a really hard question because I have so much insight and such a rich life that not having this perspective would really change the way that I kind of view the world.
A personal care assistant helps Victor dress.
I'm going to be challenged next week when I have to climb Machu Picchu, which is a lifelong dream. It's on my bucket list.
Victor flies in a plane over mountains in Peru.
And I'm challenged by thinking about how to make that journey possible, but I know that I'll get through it.
Two men guide Victor's wheelchair along a narrow, rocky trail. A lofty view shows a terraced hillside.
There's a triangle, 3 different things that have to come together to really unlock human accomplishments for people with disabilities. And those involve assistive technology, personal assistance, somebody that's aware, understanding how to support you. And 3 is coping strategies. And so these 3 things sort of create a variety of tools.
In a Nevada desert, Victor rides in an ice taxi.
Like my recent trip to Burning Man.
He lies on blankets.
Software, they're able to design ways and functionalities that unlock human potential.
He visits a marketplace.
It not only makes that software, that school, more useful for broader numbers of people, but it has a trickle effect. It has a multiplier effect. That it changes those people, in a sense, it changes society. Because the fact that the designer thought about a wider group of people opens up for society to see these people that were once invisible.
Victor speaks at conferences. A choral group includes some who use wheelchairs.
And the designers have the power to unlock that potential.
He consults on an urban planning design.
As people with disabilities, there is this very clear understanding that you either are able to contribute to society or you're just left out of society. And the tools that you design really change the equation in terms of what I can contribute. So remove those obstacles and let me contribute my talents, because I want to be part of society. I want to give everything I have. I don't want to sit on the sidelines. You can change that. You can change the rules of the game so the game includes me and includes my talents.
Victor eases his wheelchair down a ramp at the Ed Roberts campus in Berkeley and exits through a door to the outside. Fade to black.
Victor's my hero. It's there. We have actually 5 other videos in that series. You can find them. But when we do inclusive design sprints at Microsoft, we bring people in. This is the Inclusive Tech Lab, where you can come have a tour. I know I keep saying that, but I really hope you come. We bring people in with disabilities. We have these conversations. We ask them about their experiences in their lives. And the one thing that I do say about this process that I think is really important is that quite often people can look at this process as like training. They'll approach it like they're being trained, and that's not right. Or they'll approach it like it's kind of like user research validation, and that's not right. I work a lot with hardware people, and sometimes, I will joke about my hardware engineering friends. Hardware engineers are the engineeriest, like they can be very, very focused to the point sometimes where it can be tricky, because I remember we had one sprint where we were talking about the Surface and Windows and how people use computers and what are the challenges you have throughout your day. And there was an engineer that just like was trying to like figure out a way to get their question in. And eventually they're like, what do you think of this power button on the Surface? And the person's like, I've never thought twice about the power button on the Surface. And that was that engineer's whole world, right? You know, I put people in these situations and they can be uncomfortable. I get a lot of feedback from people every time I do one of these where they're like, I wish it was more like a traditional usability test where I was behind the glass and someone was facilitating this. That's basically what they're saying. And I basically go, sucks to be you. I'm not going to do that, right? I am here to make you feel uncomfortable. So we have these great conversations. We take those conversations. They are all typically recorded. You know, we typically record them. I'm going to give you some do's and don'ts though first, before I was going to get to where I was going about the recordings. You know, it's important to ask how their experiences in their day-to-day activities, what's good, what's bad. Be conversational, listen, observe. This all sounds pretty understanding or easy, right? Write down quotes. Quotes are super important. Be curious. I always tell people on both sides, you can ask any question you want and you don't have to answer any question you don't want to. When I work with Xbox, people will come in and go, hey, when's the next Xbox? And we're all like, you know, we're not going to tell you, you know. And sometimes people will ask questions of folks that are very personal, and they don't necessarily know they're very personal. And I always tell people, you don't have to answer them. Always address the advisors directly. So what does that mean? If you're talking to someone who's nonverbal because of cerebral palsy, and they have someone with them that is helping basically interpret, you still talk to the person. You know, when you're talking to someone who's deaf who has an interpreter, you talk to the person. You don't talk to the interpreter. They're not really there. So don't jump straight into questions about the components you work in, which is really hard for a lot of folks. Everyone wants to validate, but just try to keep watch on it. Don't expect this again is probably mostly for our team, which is don't expect them to separate software experiences from hardware ones. You know, people come into the lab all the time and they go, okay, here's what I need you to fix in Chrome. And then I'm like, we don't make Chrome. And they don't get it. And nor should they, right? Press people on things they don't want to talk about, but try to pick up on body language. That's probably one for me, trying to like more nudge. And don't ask caregivers questions or directly. So yeah, so we talk to these people, we record the sessions. We typically do hybrid sprints. So the recording's pretty easy for us. When I say hybrid, like, so we'll have people in the room, we'll have people on a Teams call. The Teams calls are recorded. The transcripts go into Copilot. Things become a lot easier. You know, we take those transcripts. This is, again, just me, how we do it. You guys can figure out how you'd want to do it. We take those transcripts and we tend to make agents for them. So I'll take like 20 or 30 hours of transcripts. I'll throw them into a Copilot Studio. I'll make an agent. I'll start to ask questions of the agent. Like, what are the themes that you're getting from all this? I will tell you, it's been life-changing to basically be able to like take 30 hours of transcript audio and just start asking it questions. Because it really gives you the ability to focus on the notes that you want to take, and you're not sitting there like frantically scrambling to take every note possible.
Does that work well? Why not? It probably does because you use it. But how do you experience kind of a learning curve or quality?
So the tools are getting better, but I am also getting better. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Because I did try that.
Yeah.
A year ago, it was just trash out.
Sure. You have a question too?
Yeah, also about the agents.
Mm-hmm.
One agent for all sessions there, or be separate or
No, I wouldn't do an agent per advisor, honestly, just because it would be too much work. And what I'm mostly trying to get in these sessions is I'm mostly trying to find bigger themes to kind of go to our last principle, solve for one, extend to many. I will say though that I do take the I do take the transcript input and I edit it. I edit out all the niceties. You know, it's not heavily. Like I'm not like basically reading 30 hours, but I'm taking out the parts like at the beginning where we're all sitting down and trying to get seated and things like that. I do tend to also add some information at the top of each file. And these are all just Word files in a SharePoint site, right?
You kind of add your own perspective, at least.
I add some clarification. I add basically some metadata to the top, right? That basically kind of helps. So you can see the kind of instructions, right? Assist in inventing new features and assistive technologies, ask questions and brainstorm. So I'm giving it, again, this is where like I've learned how to basically write better prompts and why I'm giving you all the prompts that I've kind of written for those other things. Because all agents are just kind of bundles of prompts, really, you know, some connectors and things like that.
Yeah, that's really cool. And stop experimenting too early.
Yeah, I mean, it is hard when you use AI and you don't get the results you want. But I will tell you, and then this is going to sound, I'm going to sound a little bit shilly here, so please be okay with it. You know, people do not use it correctly, right? They tend to use it like they use Google, right? And that's not right. So spending some time, the best advice, which is you've all probably heard, but it is true, is just treat it like a colleague and give it the amount of information you'd give like a colleague who you were going to ask to go do this work. Like, so if you were going to give someone a task to go do it, provide all that same information to the prompt, so that you can basically like, it can go away and do it. The prompts that I've been doing, I've tested in Claude and in Gemini, and they work. Not just Copilot, not just ChatGPT. I mostly use Copilot and ChatGPT. That's just so I needed to make sure that I tested them in systems that I don't use, because if any of you have used ChatGPT a long time, it's kind of eerie how much it knows you. You know, most of the time I have to tell it to stop knowing me so well. At UX India, Sonal here did this great presentation where she talked about, and she's from The Economist, and she talked about the idea of using AI as synthetic user research, which was really neat. And I liked how she said synthetic, because it really drives home the fact that it's not real, you know, but it's still really useful, right? And this sort of slide here was really helpful. One of the things that I've been really finding really useful in my practice, and this is going to be hard for folks who work on like B2B or enterprise type stuff, is I can go to YouTube and find, I don't know if you know this, but people criticize us a lot, right? I get there's a lot of things out there where people have some very valid complaints. So I can go to YouTube and find people giving hour-long rants about our products and showing people how they work. And I can go and I can rip down that transcript file from YouTube, and I can throw it into my agent, and it can become part of my synthetic user research, right? And I can use those references. It's really quite powerful. And I'm no data scientist. I'm not writing like sentiment analysis and things like that. I'm really just grabbing quick things. But like this is an example from my friend Jesse, who is low vision, and his YouTube handle is illegally cited, which I adore because he's legally blind, so he's illegally cited. You know, but this talk was like an hour and 14 minutes, where he was just basically, he was lamenting how he feels the game industry has stalled in its accessibility progress. And it was good. It was gold, you know? There's a summary of what his hour talk was. Okay, last one. Solve for one, extend to many. Everyone has abilities and limits to those abilities. Designing for people with permanent disabilities actually results in designs that benefit people universally. Constraints are a beautiful thing. So the core of this principle is the idea that when we design for someone with a permanent disability, like this woman who has one hand, someone with a temporary disability, this boy with a broken arm, benefit, and then someone with a situational disability, this man holding his daughter, situational limitation, also benefits. So this is the canonical way that we think about solve for one, extend to many, right? The reason why we hit permanent disability so hard in the principle is that it's really easy for people to get inspired here and then think of what the situational one is and then focus here because this is where they're used to thinking, right? Like, oh, I'll design my UI for people holding kids. And sometimes the problem is that they don't solve for the permanent disability. This principle is not designed for one, extend to many, it's solve, right? Right? And I think that's really an important thing. And I always remind people of that all the time because sometimes it often gets misquoted as designed for one, extend to many. I'm like, no, solve, right? You know, that's the word choice is really important. And it's intentional there. Okay, let's see if this video sounds playing. If I have to do that dance again, which apparently I do. Oh no, sorry. I'm going to set that up because I love this video so much. This is, does anyone remember Mario Go when it came out for the Apple iPhone? This is the announcement at Apple's developer conference. And Miyamoto's on stage basically talking about this, but it's my favorite situational limitation.
But what's new this time, what's different is that you can play the game one-handed for the very first time. And what that means is that you can play while holding on to a handle on the subway, while eating a hamburger, or while eating an apple.
Play while eating a hamburger. Number one situational limitation. I'm from Seattle. It's play while drinking a coffee. So this is just the Xbox adaptive controller and some of the stuff that plugs into it to just show you the way that we think about it. And in my other talk on Monday, this is why I talk about devices and accessories and augmentations. I think of these. I have this photo is like this for a reason because I think about it, these centralized things, these devices that we're using, and how do we accessorize them and augment them, display them out in kind of all these different directions, right? This is a friend of ours. This is actually a picture from the very first Inclusive Tech Lab. All the other pictures I've been showing you are the second one. We got some money. This man is what they would call a high quadriplegic. So he literally has no movement from below his neck. We are setting him up with a mouth-based joystick that will plug into the adaptive controller. He uses it with his mouth, and when he blows into it, it's one button, and when he sucks on it, it's a separate button. And we got him playing Rocket League with this thing, right? Again, you can imagine the mere millimeters thing. Like if that thing is just a few millimeters off, it's not really very useful for him. This is another user that has a condition called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Has anyone ever heard of EDS? Got a couple? Cool. Fibromyalgia, maybe? All right, we'll get into that in a bit. Ehlers-Danlos syndrome is actually really fascinating to me. It's something I've been thinking about a lot. It's pretty rare. But you're starting to see it basically diagnosed a lot more, quite honestly, because it's mostly in women, and women's healthcare has not really been that great traditionally. So you're starting to see it diagnosed more because we're getting our act together. I don't know. Don't want to be too positive about it. Huh? Yeah. It's very cool. But they have EDS. And if you play video games, you'll know that the joysticks are buttons. And games want people to press the joysticks like they're buttons. And with EDS, the condition basically makes your muscles and your skin really elasticy. And the way that it's been described to me, and I really like this analogy, is imagine a belt on a motor, okay? and that belt starts to stretch out. It still works, but it just doesn't work as well, right? So people with EDS like can basically get tired really quickly. They have really limited strength. In the case of this person, they could not press stick buttons. So what we did was we took the adaptive controller. We used a feature on Xbox called Controller Assist. We pair these two controllers to the Xbox so they act as one. That's really important when we think about modularity in the system, right? We want to have people have multiple controllers that they can use. And then we remap these two big buttons, so all they have to do is let the gravity of their hands basically rest, and they can remap those two big buttons to the buttons that they can't press. So it's a different example of how we think about adaptive, right? Like we're trying to think about input in many, many different ways all the time. You know, and I'm showing you these two examples to really kind of show you this broad spectrum of like, you know, very bespoke mouth controller and, you know, this person who's using just two off-the-shelf products in a, you know, in a very specific way, right? Oh yeah, this is my diagram of controller assist. Controller assist was inspired by special effect because they used to actually take game controllers and they'd crack them open and they'd solder wires to make two controllers look like one controller. So when we saw these photos, we were like, well, we could do that in software. And then we went and did it. Okay, I'm going to set this up first. This is my buddy Brad and Dan. They have a YouTube channel called All Access Life. You should go watch it. It's really great. Brad has cerebral palsy. Dan's his caregiver. They're going to use controller assist to play some Fortnite. And Brad's going to use those two buttons on his head array. He's going to use one of them to shoot and one of them to pick up stuff.
What's going on, All Access Lifers? Brad's over at my place today for a big old gaming day. We're gonna be playing some Fortnite for you guys today, using Brad's Xbox Adaptive Controller. And we'll be using an accessibility feature that Microsoft has called Copilot, which essentially allows two controllers to merge together and act as one. Let's open this up. Okay, start hitting, start hitting. Okay, hit it. There he is, shoot him, shoot him, shoot, yes, yes! Oh, let's go to that one. Okay, we gotta go this one. You have to open fast. You have to open this one fast. Open, open, open. Okay, pick that up, pick that up. Okay, now get ready to shoot. Shoot, shoot, shoot. Hold out. Yeah, hold it down, hold it down, hold it down. Come on, come on. Yes, yes, we got him. Oh yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah. They go to like community events and then they add a third. So then they like get three people like playing one character. It's really wild. Oh, picking up stuff. So when he was like, pick up that stuff, that was, so basically one side was like the trigger and then I think the other side was probably like the X button to pick up things. Yeah, and the other guy was doing everything else. And so the reason why we like this example so much and how it kind of influenced the system, I get a lot of parents in particular who come to me who have kids that with disabilities, limited mobility, and they go, what's a simple game that my kid can play? And then I always ask them, well, what kind of game do they want to play? What kind of games? So these parents come to me and they go, I would like to basically have my kid play a game. And I go, well, what do their siblings play? Well, their siblings play Fortnite, their siblings play Roblox, their siblings play Minecraft. What kind of game can my kid play? And I'm like, your kid's not going to want to play a game that their siblings aren't playing. So this feature used to be called Copilot. You can see why that was confusing. So we changed it to Controller Assist. Now, but part of me kind of wonders if I named Copilot. Someday, if I ever get to talk to Satya, I'll be like, is that me? But, but we asked them, like, be there for your kid, right? And again, parents are like, well, I'm not a gamer. And I'm like, well, suck it up. Like, I don't know, get good. That's very toxic gamer talk. you know, very naughty of me. Get good. So how did we sell this? We sold this at a time. Let's see if I can pause this. We sold this at a time when Xbox wasn't ready to do things that weren't compliance related. I'm sure a lot of you are in this boat, right? You do accessibility if it has compliance. You know, we sold that at a time that did this. Who's ever played video games with a really little kid? Okay. Did they suck at it? Were they terrible? Shooting at the ceiling? And then you're like, you're taking the controller going, here, let me show you how to do it. And then they're like, wow. So we presented that story to our executive team and we said, hey, controller assist. You can have a controller on the side. This doesn't have to be an adaptive controller and a regular controller or any combination. You can have two regular controllers. You can sit there on the side. Like I've done this with kids in the lab all the time where I set them up and they're still not very great. And I just controller assist another controller and I like nudge them back onto the road or like kind of like, and they don't know, they think they're awesome. And I'm like, this is great, right? But yeah, our executives were like, oh wait, so we get all of this accessibility stuff. I gotta fix that. We get all this accessibility stuff and we get like this cool scenario where my kid's not bawling. Great. You know, and that's how we sold it. And we validated this. This video popped up on Reddit shortly after we launched the feature. She's a 3-year-old girl playing some Minecraft with her dad.
You can do the same button, the left trigger. Oh, or you can do the door. Oh, did he move?
Oh, you need to sleep.
Time to sleep? Well, better open the door. Now walk through. You're gonna spend all night closing doors and you're not gonna get to sleep.
You guys get the idea. So, recognize exclusion. Exclusion happens when we solve problems using our own biases, blah, blah, blah. The thing to remember is that everyone has biases. We all have biases. Don't let your assumptions, and my subnote here, or your comfort get the best of you. Intentionally engage people with disabilities. You know, I know people can be uncomfortable around people with disabilities. I get it. My problem is, quite honestly, is I'm way too comfortable around people with disabilities. It can get weird. You know. Learn from diversity. Doing exactly what one person says may steer you in the wrong direction and incomplete insight. I have had engineers and designers with like decades of experience meet one person with a disability. That person goes, I think you should do this. And they're like, that's a great idea. And they go off to go do it. And then I chase them down the hall going, whoa, whoa, whoa. You would never do what one customer says in any other situation. Don't do it here, right? So there's a desire by all of us to do the right thing, and that's good. I just need to kind of temper it sometimes. And this last one, you know, which we are going to get into a bit more. Although AI can generate personalized, flexible systems, design synthesis is critical for shaping and optimizing those solutions. So does everyone know what I mean by design synthesis? So here's some definitions of design synthesis. It's this idea that we all have as designers where we're not basically going through and going, this is a bug, this is a fix. This is a bug, this is a fix. We're going through and we're looking at the problems and we're designing things that can deal with things in multiple directions, right? So design synthesis is really important because it's something that we as designers and researchers do naturally, and engineers don't necessarily do it. Engineering approaches tend to be a lot more like problem, solution, problem, solution, problem, solution, right? And so the reason why we think about synthesis a lot, my old boss, the guy who I basically owe my whole career to, is this guy named August de los Reyes. He sadly is no longer with us. But he used to say that accessibility is a clinical approach. It's an engineering approach, bug, fix, barrier, facilitator to get over the barrier, right? Whereas inclusive design was a lot more like urban planning. How do we think about creating these systems that where the barriers just don't exist, that you don't need the accommodation to get over the barrier? And yes, that's a very lofty goal, but it is the lofty goal that we aspire to, and we get to that goal through design synthesis. So synthesis is always really important. So while you can use AI to basically go through your transcripts and give you those ideas and maybe even help you align some of those ideas, the act of synthesis is something that we have to do as humans. So I'm going to show you another video. I like showing videos because they're fun. This one is the video from the hackathon that became the adaptive accessories.
When Yara was born, doctors weren't certain whether she was going to make it. But with Yara's enormous perseverance, amazing doctors, the latest recuperation technologies, a lot of therapy, and a little miracle, she managed to surprise us all. New lightweight 3D printed orthotics empowered her to learn how to walk. A speech computer empowered her to improve her voice. Play, practice, patience, and innovation help Yara to unlock her full potential. Project Mattis is a new chapter. Yara's spasm prevents her from using a normal mouse, because her fingers slide off the mouse surface. With a small modification, one can augment the mouse with a new cover, which keeps Yara's fingers on the mouse. This design empowers her to use a computer mouse for the first time. We have only just started to unlock the enormous potential software has for her life. We are on a mission to empower more people like Yara to unlock their full potential. We need your help to make Mattis the most accessible and customizable mouse out there. Come and join our effort to empower every person to achieve more.
So that was the hackathon video that became the Microsoft Adaptive Accessories. I showed you some of that on Monday. Here's the mouse, here's the hub. This is a 3D printed augmentation. It snaps into here. Normally I carry more, but it's been a long month of travel, and I traveled a little lighter this time. But that's how that system kind of works, right? And that's where that kind of came from. Here's again the picture of one of the launch photos of all the things. There is really only the base unit of the mouse. Now the mouse is in a bunch of tails. There's the button, and then there's the hub, which is up top. Everything that's black in this photo is something that we make, and everything that's a color is a 3D printed augmentation. We give away those files. You can download them, you can modify them, you can tweak them and put them on your system. Make sure that works that way. Now, I said on Monday that awareness is essential, and we haven't cracked the code, right? It is something that we really need to do. This was 3 different launch videos from the adaptive accessories. I'm going to play them for you. The marketing team came to me and said, hey, we've got this guy named Squirmy. His YouTube channel is Squirmy and Grubs. He's got over 1 million subscribers. It's pretty awesome. We have Mandy here, who's Limb Different. But instead of Brad, who you've met already, they had another Limb Different person. And I asked the marketing team, I was like, well, why? And they're like, well, she has pretty good follower count. And I'm like, nah, I need variety, right? I need variety to show, because the challenge is that we can make these products, but they are unusual, right? People need someone to demonstrate it for them that's like them. So I need as many examples as I possibly can. So let's play these videos.
Every year, Hannah and I like to send out cards for the new year, which I think officially means that we're old people. Hannah's normally the one to design these, but now, thanks to my new Microsoft Adaptive Accessories, I have the power to make the most beautiful New Year's card that ever existed. My masterpiece is complete. Print. Hannah!
Okay, Shane, I got it. What? Shane, my face is completely cut off.
I know, it's perfect. Happy New Year, everyone.
So yeah, earlier on, I've been talking to you a lot about people who have gross motor control and no fine motor control, right? Shane has a condition called spinal muscular atrophy, which basically means he only has fine motor control because he has no strength. I mean, you can see he doesn't have a lot of muscle tone, right? So he can only move his hands really small differences. So it's really important that the base mouse is light and is as sensitive as possible. Because for a guy like Shane, that's all he can do. He can just move it a few millimeters. So we need to create a mouse where you can move a few millimeters and have things kind of work. So again, this is this idea of like solve for one, extend to many. Yara, the girl in the first video, who is the daughter of the guy who designed the mouse, she has cerebral palsy, right? So with her, we turn the sensitivity down. We add augmentations to make it harder to press the button. We add resistance to give her precision. We think about all these spectrums of like what people need. We try to create something that you can go buy in the store and basically just like come home and make it work for you. So that's that. Let's go on to Mandy's video.
Hello, my friends. It's Mandy with Be the Spark Cosplay. I've been telling you how excited I am about the release of Microsoft's new adaptive accessories. The best way I know how to explain why adaptive tech is so impactful for people like me is this. If you are an able-bodied person, I want you to imagine for a minute that the programs you use every day for work required you to use a mouse and a keyboard and one more button than you have a hand for, all at the same time. Sure, you can probably make that work. But also, this is not ideal. The adaptive accessories let me work in a way that is natural for me. It's a freedom to be yourself. Just better.
I don't know if I agree with the foot thing, Mandy, but that's cool. Little artistic license. Let's watch Brad's.
I used to only use eye tracking to navigate and control my Surface Book 3. Eye tracking allows me to navigate my device very fast. I never would have thought there would be a way to navigate even faster and be more productive. But now there is. Thanks to the Microsoft Adaptive Accessories, I can now perform certain tasks with a simple click of a button. Check this out. I'll open up my communication software by clicking the button on my tray. Then I'll say my next line by flicking the joystick right beside it. I love how the Microsoft Adaptive Accessories amplify my current setup, allow me to be more productive, and navigate my device even faster. Find out how the Microsoft Adaptive Accessories can make you more productive.
So that was a short video, and I'm going to explain some stuff because you're probably like, what the heck just happened there? So Brad uses eye control to navigate his PC. So he has a sensor that basically like moves like a mouse on the screen. And then he has an on-screen keyboard. So imagine Brad posts on LinkedIn. He basically goes to this eye control keyboard and he types out what he wants to say with his eyes, which might sound like it's like kind of cool and you wish you could do that. But I will tell you that it is way more exhausting to type with your eyes than it is with your hands. Especially, for us, he's a pro at it, so it's probably not as bad for him, but it is still very tiring. And when he types out that letter, he has to basically minimize that keyboard, switch over to LinkedIn, right? and then paste that content into LinkedIn, right? So he's got to copy it, he's got to paste it. So what he set up with the adaptive accessories, which again is a important way of how we think about it, is he created these macros to accelerate his experience. So what he was doing with the joystick is that he created a macro of common things that he could accelerate that he does all the time. And so you can set up a macro in the adaptive accessories so that when you press the button once, it does one thing, and then it pauses the macro. And the second time you press the button, it restarts the macro, and there's other pauses. So what Brad does is he has one button because he doesn't have a lot of fine motor control. He basically just hammers on a button, and he types out his message, and then he hits the button, and it throws a Control A. Does anyone know what, Windows, Control A, select all? Okay. Hits that same button the second time, Control C. He hits a different button, a second button, and it throws a Windows 1 or a Windows 2 in a sequence. So it allows him to basically navigate the items that are on his taskbar. So he doesn't have to use his eye control to go, click, switch up, move around, because it's very tiring. Then he goes into LinkedIn, and he hits that button that he just hit for Control C. He hits it again, and it throws a Control V, pastes it into LinkedIn. So he creates these systems so that basically accelerate his movement, which is something that we thought about from the very beginning, because we knew that people had a lot of repetitive things. If you think about how you interact with a computer, you do a lot of the same stuff all day long, right? And I will say that when you think about solve for one, extend to many here, for us, I work with a lot of people who are my age at Microsoft, right? There's a lot of us old timers there, and a lot of us have carpal tunnel because we've spent our entire lives basically on mouse and keyboard. And I will tell you, and then, I'm sure that you probably can relate to this, some of you, you go to your doctor and your doctor says, well, you can't do that anymore. And what do? You ignore that doctor, right? I'm not going to not use my computer the way I have for 30 years. So what do? You start to ration your time. You start to find workarounds. So what we show those folks with these adaptive accessories is like, hey, switch up the movement. I showed you that picture of the guy who was playing video games with your feet. No one ever thinks about their feet. You can go to Amazon right now and buy these like foot pedals that plug into a USB port that you can map to all kinds of things, right? And the adaptive accessories is no different. So yeah, another part of the practice. Think about how we can switch up the movement. Look, Renee, double diamond. So wild that the double diamond came up like multiple times in this thing. I hadn't thought about the double diamond in forever. But it's interesting, right? Because I think that's how we have started to approach this. And there's no one from Fable here, so I'll tell you a bit of a story. We recently worked with Fable, and I pushed their user researchers a little bit to be uncomfortable because I was basically, we did some great user research with them. They're amazing partners, right? They got us some wonderful people, and we heard their feedback, and it was very normal, typical user research, qualitative feedback. We did a couple rounds of that. We dove into some of the themes and asked them to expand on it. And then for the third round, I asked their user research facilitator, I go, work with that person, and instead of interviewing with them, come up with ideas. And they go, well, how many ideas? And I go, you have 30 people. I want 150 ideas, right? And the user researcher was like really nervous. It's not something that they normally do. And to be honest, it was because when he thinks of an idea, it was like a page document, whereas when I think of an idea, it's a Post-it note, right? And that was something we worked out together. But we got those 100, he gave me those ideas, right? And they helped us basically think about it. So that's the divergence part, right? As many ideas as we possibly can get. And then we come in and filter them. And typically in the past, again, this is an inclusive design sprint for our old lab. We get a bunch of us together, we Post-it note, we put them on the boards, we move things around, and this was great, and it still is great. If people want to do this, we still do this. but there is a lot more ways that we can get more ideas quickly, right? I showed you a bit in the beginning how we're using AI to recognize exclusion. We can do stuff like that here too. So for me, the way that I think about the double diamond, Renee, you probably think similarly, I'm going to assume. I think about the divergence part being human plus AI, but I think about the convergence part being human, right? Let's keep it in our expertise. Let's not ask it to like start whittling down the ideas, right? Or to focus the ideas or just synthesize the ideas, right? So that's how I think about the double diamond and how we're working with humans plus AI. I have another set of prompts, and it's in the handout, that basically help you solve for one and extend to many. Okay? So I only have 2 prompts in here. In the recognize exclusion, I have a mobile prompt. But here I've got a game prompt. I have games mobile and web in the recognize exclusion. The solve for one extend to many, I didn't get mobile. But let's copy this prompt. Actually, we can go through it really quickly. You know, I'm a game designer applying the Microsoft inclusive design methods, specifically the principle of solve for one extend to many to identify personal barriers in games that I'm designing. The goal is to generate 6 structured examples. There are links to all the source files that I do to give it those examples. And I will tell you those source files are really important. So, you know, let's just quickly take a look at one because I think it'll help you see what we're dealing with here. So this HTML file just has like, this is me basically going through and using AI to brainstorm possible solutions. Like there are hundreds in here, right? Just goes on and on, right? So, you know, take this file, it's fine. That's what I put it up online for, right? You know, you can kind of use it, but I wanted to make sure that the prompt had a really solid foundation of knowledge to build from. I didn't want it to just make up stuff. Yet, at the same time, the prompt is allowed to go beyond this. So the prompt isn't just using this as its only source of information. So let's go back here. Let's copy this prompt. We'll go back to Copilot. Let's do start a new chat. Okay, let's describe the game pattern. What's the pattern? How does it appear in gameplay? What kind of interaction does it require from players? Are there visual, auditory, or haptic elements involved? Anyone want to do this, or you guys want me to do this? Any game ideas? Any game players in here? Anyone got a game they're playing right now? All right. I'm actually going to do an unusual one. Let's see what happens. What's the pattern and how it works? I'm going to say pattern matching like in Candy Crush. Let's see what it does with that. Where does it appear in gameplay? It is the game. What kind of interaction does it require from players? Drag and drop. And any auditory, visual, or haptic elements involved. So I'm going to say visual complexity and noisy celebrations. Let's see what that does. I'm thinking in my head about all the challenges of Candy Crush. Does anyone here have can anyone in here, Stephanie talked about how she has vestibular disorders. So games like Candy Crush are probably a little bit wild on her senses, right? Like, yeah. You have that too? So when I talk to Candy Crush players, it's wild, right? It's because the accessibility person in us would say, have a setting to turn those celebrations off, which I think Candy Crush does, and that's important. But the people that I know that have sensory issues don't turn it off because they like the celebrations, right? So it's a little weird, right? I always describe it like, it's like, well, I don't drink whiskey because I don't like the burn, right? Right? I drink whiskey because I like the burn. So, you know, there's always this, I think that's this really interesting thing in inclusive design that we don't think about enough. Like, you know, and this is me pontificating a little bit. Like, accessibility is always like, well, this is a problem, turn it off. And I'm like, but the problem is, like, especially in gaming, right? Like, if you took all the barriers out of games, you'd have a movie, right? Gaming is barriers. So it's about right sizing the barriers. It's about tuning them to fit your needs, right? And so I hope as designers we can kind of do that. Are there any time-based mechanisms or pressure countdown? I'm going to say nope. What kind of feedback do players receive when they make matches? Flashy, flashy. Is there a game primary single player? Single player. Okay, let's see what it does. So I only asked this prompt to give me 6, whereas the last one I gave like 30. So this is the spectrum that it came up with, right? So low vision, post-concussion, distracted commuter, right? Solve for one, extend to many. And again, these are just idea generators. You have to validate these with people, right? So it talks about visual perception, the difficulty processing dense visual layouts. It is always interesting on mobile apps when people think that people have this fine motor control to hit a button, a tiny button, until they ride the bus, right? And they're on the bus, and, whoa, missing, you know? Oh, this one I feel like this. It's funny. I feel like Johan is who's probably in another room. Hopefully he's not here. But this one's photosensitive epilepsy. This is a wild one. So sensitivity to flashing lights and high contrast animations, people can experience discomfort or health risks. Flashing lights, and that's really true. I think what I like to kind of point out that I haven't really talked about yet today is that there are all kinds of like nuance to barriers that people kind of exhibit. So most of you who do any accessibility work, you're probably thinking about blindness. You absolutely should. It's important. Blind people get a barrier, a solid barrier. I cannot progress any further, right? Whereas someone who might have like chronic fatigue or ADHD can run out of basically energy throughout the day, and they experience these kind of micro barriers that eventually lead to basically shutting down. And it's a different hierarchy of needs, right? The thing about epilepsy and some of these barriers, that's a potential health risk for someone. So when I talk about epilepsy, like in Washington State where I'm from, if you have a photosensitive epileptic seizure, you are unable to drive a car for 6 months, right? So that's a pretty serious thing if some random video game gave that to you. So it's one of the things that I think, these are the things that, quite honestly make me a real bummer in video game meetings, but that is my job. So yeah, that's that prompt. I hope that's fun for you. Let's talk about some other stuff. Oh, I've not been on full screen for a long time. This feels so bad. It's just silly me. This is some data. I like to collect prevalence data. This is what I do at night when I watch TV, is I make charts of prevalence data. I also have this thing in the background where I basically say, this side of the chart, when you solve for muscular dystrophy or quadriplegia or cerebral palsy, you have huge impact in people's lives, right? But this side of the chart, you have large amounts of people, okay? So this is how I think about solve for one, extend to many, because I don't have to think about the non-disabled. So I think about these spectrums of like limitations for people with disabilities, right? And down here, I have this like basically these sort of attributes that allow me to kind of say, well, this one's like this one, so on and so on. So I'm going to get back to this chart in a minute. One of the things that the deliverable that I tend to push in our inclusive design sprint is a written scenario. And the reason why I do that is because engineers can do them, PMs can do them, designers can do them. It's not that I tell my designers that they can't draw stuff or do other things. It's just, I don't like it when PMs show up and think that they just want to be there. Again, like, this is not training, right? Like, I show up the first day and I go, you're all going to make something. So I need to give people something that they can actually make. And this scenario framework is pretty good. This is something that some of these folks who were at Microsoft many, many years ago wrote. It's called scenario focused engineering. The scenario structure is pretty basic. You start with a challenge. You describe the challenge of the customer. You get into the details, and then you describe the happy outcome, and you leave out the implementation part in the middle. You just skip it. You basically go, what's the challenge? What's the good, happy end state and the solution? And what I always tell people, like, be specific. Don't say usually, sometimes. Tell a story. It's not a list. Hardware engineers, I cannot write stories. Hardware engineers and hardware program managers think in spec sheets. So if you've ever bought a computer and it says 16 gigs of RAM and 25, that's how their brains work, right? And I have to push them to basically say, no, tell a story. Make it engaging. You know, you all saw Ben's talk on storytelling. I can't do better than that. And remove implementation details. I sometimes break this rule. So, it's not a hard and fast rule. So I'm going to go back to this chart. Oh, wow, it really blocked it out. Okay. Sorry, lights in here are hard. So I told you a bit about Ehlers-Danlos, right? 150,000 currently in the US. It's obviously an estimate. Most of you hadn't heard of it. How about fibromyalgia? Who's heard of fibromyalgia? A lot more? Great. Fibromyalgia, 6.9 million people in the US. How about arthritis? Okay. Arthritis, right? The reason why I group these together is they have similar functional limitations, just to different extreme levels. And so for me, this is solve for one, extend to many, right? You don't have to do this. You can do the non-disabled stuff. It's super cool. I'm sure your team will love it. You'll do great work for your customers. But for me, my customers are only disabled. So this is how I approach it, right? Solve for one, extend to many. So I'm going to show you how we're using generative AI to tell these stories using this scenario framework with this pair, Gal and Sal. Gal and Sal are power users in every sense of the word. They run ops in IT during the day and command the leaderboard at night. Living with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome means no input stays neutral. Every action, button press, joystick flick, or mouse click must be carefully measured to avoid fatigue, pain, and injury. Even the best accessibility tools lag behind the pace and demands of real-time gameplay. They've done the work to adapt, building custom control schemes and setups, but they shouldn't have to fight to play this hard. What they want now are systems that already know what they need: low resistance, cross-device input, and interfaces that flex with their condition. These two characters came from us actually, you've seen pictures of one of them already, right? This was us taking the information from those users and synthesizing them in ways so that we can tell these very rich stories. I will be completely honest with you all. I have a weird relationship with personas. I hate personas just like everyone else does, but I'm trying to tell, the problem is that I need to quickly tell stories about people who are unusual to most of my stakeholders. So most of the time, so here's a fun little Windows fact, okay? Most of my peers in Windows show up at a meeting and they go, "This sucks in File Manager." And everyone in the room goes, "Hell yeah, it does." And then they move on, right? Whereas I have to show up and they move on to what and how. They get to skip over the who and why, and they get to move on to what and how right away. Whereas I have to show up and go, "There's this condition called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome." And they're like, "What?" What's that? Who's that? How does it work? And then you start talking about neural diversity, and people are like, what do you mean people get tired from doing nothing in the middle of the day? Yeah, spoon theory. So I have to spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to quickly talk about the challenges and the who and the why. And this is where I'm at right now. If a bunch of you are thinking, why don't you do videos? Videos took too long. I needed to do 8-panel comics because my leadership and the people I needed to do this wouldn't watch a 3-minute video, right? So 8 panels of comics, that's where I'm at right now. And we'll see how it goes. I mean, maybe, the tools might shift. I could throw these comics into Sora. We'll see what happens, right? I could make some cool videos. We'll see how it goes. So this is the challenge part of Sal's gaming to adapt to his limits. I'm going to read this. I like the comic format because it can give you like this kind of glimpse into like the person's mindset, and then you can spend most of the time. Sal's hands ache almost immediately, lifting thumbs and pressing triggers. Every motion costs him. Even on good days, his controller demands more than his joints can give. So he's like 1 hour a day, right? You ever meet someone who, well, maybe not, but I've met a lot of people who play like online games, and because of arthritis or something, they can only play for 1 hour a day. Man, that hour is the most important part of their day. They structure their whole rest of their day just so they can get that hour. Stick clicks are impossible, so Sal remaps when the game lets him. Some games trap critical actions on buttons Sal can't use. So that's sometimes a problem. Full day of work means that he has no energy left for games. His pain isn't isolated. It adds up from every screen and every click. I think that's the one thing about chronic pain that people don't understand is the cumulative effect, right? And it's a hard story to tell, right? Because, I'm talking about an IT guy who comes home and plays video games, and we're trying to tell a story of how important it is to him, but how hard it is. And it's hard to relate to. Color change, solution. Went from orange to purple. So the new system tracks his fatigue and auto-loads a profile designed for ease. Before he picks up the controller, it's already adapting to his energy. So that's me speculating in this like kind of new world of like, hey, what if this control knew like what his energy level was like and mapped itself accordingly, right? When pain builds, the system pivots, pressure sensors and voice take over. He plays across inputs, controller, mouse, and voice, each one easing his load. You guys have been thinking about multimodal interactions? Sure you all are, right? I think what's funny about the way that we talk about multimodal interactions, and this is going to be old man Xbox guy opinion, we talk about them in isolation. So we're like, well, I use voice or I use keyboard. But think about mouse and keyboard. Mouse and keyboard is 2 different input modalities we use together all the time. What about using voice and keyboard, or voice and mouse, or gaze and keyboard, or, trackpad and, something else? How do we think about designing these interactive systems? And the reason why I say old man Xbox is because when we launched Xbox One well over 10 years ago, we had this thing called the Kinect, which was basically this camera that saw you. And when we designed the flows to use the Xbox, we had these things called cliffs, interaction cliffs, that we designed to avoid. So if you started a flow in voice, you didn't have to finish it in voice. You could finish it with controller. You could finish it with gesture, right? You could switch the modality halfway through. And I think that's something that when we talk about as an industry about multimodality, we really don't get yet. We think like, oh, well, I start with voice and I end the flow with voice. And it's like, no, what if I want to end the flow with some other thing? So, I encourage you to, a little bit of a tangent, I encourage you to think about that when you think about multimodal interaction. His system knows the signs. When things flare up, it steps in. No more remapping every time. His setup shifts seamlessly to his state. From button layouts to input types, everything flexes with him. The system carries the weight. It's not perfect, but it adjusts to where he can. think you all, I'm going to skip this next one. I kind of want to move on. But it's in the slides. You can go look at it, on the link there. So here's some tips about writing these scenarios. Tell us, we like to use this acronym, SPICIer. Scenario should be spicy, right? Tell a story with a beginning, middle, and end. Uses paragraphs, not bullet points. Focus on customer, include personal details to explain the situation, motivation, and mismatches. They are intentionally implementation free. They tell a story from the customer's point of view. They describe the problem, and they use their language. They reflect the deep insight you've uncovered in your research. It evokes empathy from the customer by including the customer's environments and their emotions, and is based on real customer research, not stereotypes or assumptions. I know we keep hammering that home, but yeah. So it's funny to end on this. I'm going to basically become like sprint operations guy now, give you some kind of tips. So let's talk about when you run one of these sprints, the invitation, the workspace, the food, scheduling, follow-ups. So invitations. I would suggest you invite 3 to 6 disabled advisors. You can get them from your colleagues, but I would also suggest that you get them externally. So in my experience, the hardest part about running an inclusive design sprint is getting 25 of my colleagues to commit 2 days. So the first thing I tend to do is send out the invites to my colleagues. We pick a date, we put it far enough in the future that I can get 2 of their days, right? So that's the first. So if I plan a sprint, that's usually, for me to get that kind of time from my colleagues, I pretty much have to do that 2 months out, to get the time. So choose a workspace that's flexible enough to support a range of conversations and activities. Something that's not too open or too closed. This room would actually be really great. The fact that it has a side room for other conversations would be really good. So you don't want the people talking over each other, but you also don't want people to move around too much. I get it, at Microsoft, we're really into our meeting rooms. So people expect to meet in a meeting room, and sometimes going from one meeting room to another just wastes a lot of time. So I do tend to let people sit in lobbies. In the Inclusive Tech Lab, we have an area outside. Sometimes we have one of our conversations outside, just to kind of mix it up. Food is good, and this conference proves it. Oh, yeah.
How have you then actually improved this space? You mentioned that you've saw one step many.
Yep.
But how will you decide which kind of diversity patch is with?
Yeah.
Consider 5 people. How do you then specify or screen?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I will admit that I do not like the term screener. This is where the designer community guy in me fights with the user researcher in me. I find screeners to be impersonal. So to answer the question of how do you find these people, earlier on in my recognized exclusion feedback, I kind of said participate in communities, right? And I know that's hard, but that's why I also want people to basically mind their colleagues. You probably have a lot more disabled colleagues than you imagine. People tend to hide their disabilities at work. So I think that's something that you should think about. But yeah, there are some good resources out there on screeners for bringing in folks with disabilities. It's just, they personally kind of feel very impersonal to me. And I am definitely not the type of researcher that wants to keep it scientific and impersonal. That's just not how I roll. So yeah, that is a hard one. And it is the hardest part of the whole process, right? I mean, the fact, I mean, at the same time, I must admit, our jobs as user researchers are to basically go out and find customers. If we're just grabbing anybody that we can to validate a scenario, it doesn't really seem very useful, right? So for me, the recruiting part is the biggest part of my job. The recognizing exclusion part is the biggest part of my job. So if you use recognize exclusion, did you have something you wanted to say, or you just, okay. You know, the way that I tend to find people is I use those, well, before I had AI, I would try to think about what are the interactions that could potentially exclude people in the thing that we're proposing. And then I would go out and find people to like sort of talk about it. So we definitely have themes. So we've done sprints where it's like, let's have blind people, let's have people with limited mobility, let's have people with cognitive disability. We want a variety. But we've also had sprints which are really very locked down on purpose. One of my favorite sprints we ever did was we were doing, is that we really wanted to explore the intersectionality of like limitations. And we were designing headphones, you know, when Microsoft used to design headphones. Actually, we still design, Xbox still design headphones. But, you know, we were looking at the barriers for over-the-ear headphones. So I was specifically recruited Black women with type 4 hair who had low vision. Because when I think about the exclusion of over-the-ear headphones, that hit a lot of boxes, right? So, and it was really hard to recruit. I basically had to find like older Black women with like low vision, but I did. But it was a really good sprint because we got to go really deep, right? Does that answer that okay? Yeah. Great. This is a sort of a sample schedule that I tend to use. So what we've kind of gone through today is that inclusive design 101 with a little bit extra, right? You know, we ask people to do a long lunch. I give people the strategies for talking with designers. You know, we talk to our advisors. I do ask people to come back at the end of the day and to write some notes down before they leave, because I will tell you quite honestly, this is the most impactful part. The people who walk away from your sprint are going to remember this the most, talking with the people with disabilities. But if they go home that night and don't write notes down because they think they're coming back the next day to write notes down, they're going to lose a lot. So at least ask them to write some stuff down before they go. That's what I've found. So then the next day we get back together, we go through a number of processes that you can find in the material that I gave you around how we identify mismatches. You know, that includes the recognizing exclusion stuff that I kind of gave you earlier. You know, we have lunch, we start to write some scenarios, we continue to write scenarios. And this is basically how we structure a 2-day sprint. If I had more time, I'd just spend more time doing this. I'd basically do another round of day 2, right? And if designers, like over the pandemic, we had to do these asynchronously. So we had basically, we gave people homework and we assigned people homework and basically asked them to follow up on it. And that's sort of how we had to approach it. So again, I think some more advice. Let participants know in advance that this is not training. This is a sprint. They are expected to build something, make something. There is always people who I say that to their face and then they sit there for 2 days like like they're in a training workshop. Outputs can be anything from UI flows and concepts or stories. And then I have a link there that'll take you to our activity cards that'll kind of show you some other stuff. We encourage active participation. One of the ways that I do get people to do the homework, right, to work on the deliverable, is I pre-schedule a review meeting with their management. Their manager gave me these people for 2 days. What does that manager get out of these 2 days, right? So that's something that we think about. Although I don't use it often. I should actually use it more. I don't use that tactic often, frankly, because I'm a wimp. But I should use it more. I should be a little bit stronger. I should actually like have some more conviction with that one. This is the worksheet. I will go back to the beginning and give you the URL again so that you can download it. But that's all the material I had. And I hope that was helpful. And I would love to answer questions because we do have time, I think. I only have a few minutes.